Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to continue our college predictions with week 4. Last week I went 12-5, which brings my total season up to 11, 33-13. Last week was a bit of a cool down week for college football. Not too much happened. But this week we're transitioning to the part of the season where it's going to be a lot more games as some of these teams are starting conference play. And one of those teams that will be starting conference play is the Wisconsin Badgers taking on the Purdue Boilermakers. The Badgers, they got a win last week, but Purdue, on the other hand, lost another home game to Syracuse. And because I am questioning my faith in Purdue, I'm going to pick Wisconsin to win this game this week. And because we have a lot of games we're doing this week, I'm going to try to go as swiftly as possible. Next we have is the North Carolina State Wolfpack taking on the winless Virginia Cavaliers. Virginia lost to Maryland last week. NC State beat the Virginia Military Academy last week. And with this being on the road, although I can see Virginia winning this game, because I think this game is being played on a Thursday or Friday, I could see Virginia win, but I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to roll with North Carolina State to win. Next, we're going to start the Saturday off with a big one. The Florida State Seminoles taking on the Clemson Tigers. Clemson, they had another good win over a small school. And Florida State, they barely escaped their conference opener against Boston College. I sensed the trap game, and I almost called it. This game is actually more of a toss-up than what you think. Because while Clemson looked horrible the first game of the season, and took them 2 games to get them going, they have finally got slowly back to normal, getting their confidence back, playing 2 no-name schools. But for Florida State, they're coming off a trap game. They had to survive Boston College, and then something else happened. Oh yeah, they had a lot of injuries on that team. And you know what? I'm actually going to go with the upset. I think Florida State will lose their first game of the season to the Clemson Tigers. If this game was being held at the Doak, I would have easily picked Florida State. Next we have is the Oklahoma Sooners taking on the Cincinnati Bearcats. As for Cincinnati, this will be their first ever game in the Big 12, in Big 12 play. Oklahoma got a road win over Tulsa, while Cincinnati lost to Miami, their in-state rival of Ohio. And because of that, and I don't think Cincinnati is the same school, I'm going to roll with Oklahoma to win on the road. Next we have is the Auburn Tigers taking on the Texas A&M Aggies. And I've been hearing reports about A&M. They're willing to pay Jimbo Fisher his money for his buyout. So that's not a good time. In other words, Jimbo's coaching for his life. Meanwhile, for Auburn, I haven't heard much from this school. Yes, they got a win over, I think, a very small school. I can't recall. And with this being a home game, I'm going to roll with Texas A&M to win. I think defensively they're going to make some plays. Next we have is the Kentucky Wildcats taking on the Vanderbilt Commodores. And Vanderbilt, if I recall last week, they lost to UNLV on the road. In Kentucky, they played a no-name school. And you know what? I might go with the up. No, I'll take that back. I'm gonna take Kentucky to win. I almost went with Vanderbilt. Next we have is Rutgers Scarlet Knight taking on the Michigan Wolverines. And for Michigan, this will be Jim Harbaugh's first game of the season. I think his suspension ends after this ended last week. He's back coaching. For Rutgers, they had a win over Virginia Tech. That's good. But they're nowhere near the level of Michigan. Although Michigan has been playing iffy football, I do think they'll get back on track with now Harbaugh being back as their coach full-time. I think Michigan will win. Next we have is the Ole Miss Rebels taking on the Alabama Crimson Tide. And the whole talk about has been involved the Alabama Crimson Tide because they looked horrible against South Florida. Granted, it was raining, messy conditions, weather delay, but even after that, no, both quarterbacks that played that game could not get going. So bad that they turned back to Jalen Milroe as the starter, and he'll be likely be the starter for the rest of the season. As for Ole Miss, they had a pretty big win over Georgia Tech. Now, for me, this one could go either way, but I know one thing I'm trusting this year, and I might have to trust a lot of them, is Alabama's defense. I'm going to roll with Bama to win. I think defensively they're going to really put pressure on the Ole Miss offense. And yeah, I think they're going to be the main difference in this game. Give me Alabama. Next we have is the Boston College Eagles taking on the Louisville Cardinals. Louisville is 3-0. Wait, Louisville is 3-0. In Boston College, they played a really good game against Florida State, but in the end they came up just short. So I'm actually going to roll with Louisville to win. They're at home, and that's a safe pick for me to make. Next we have BYU's first game in conference play, and they'll be taking on the Kansas Jayhawks. For BYU, they got a big win over the Arkansas Razorbacks. For Kansas, they had a win over Nevada. This game, I honestly think could go in any direction. I'm actually going to go with the road team this time. And I'm going to take BYU to win their first ever Big 12 game in school history. Next we have is Maryland taking on the team formerly coached by Mel Tucker in the Michigan State Spartans. Now, Michigan State did fire Mel Tucker at some point this week. And trust me, when I make this selection, it has nothing to do with it. But Michigan State, they got worn out by Washington. Maryland, they're playing pretty good football right now. I'm going with the road team in the Maryland Terrapins to win over Michigan State. Next we have is the Texas Tech Red Raiders taking on the West Virginia Mountaineers. For West Virginia, they won the backyard brawl over Pitt, telling the world that you should never trust Pitt. As for Texas Tech, got their first win over Tarleton, or whatever that small school name is. For this game, this was another one of those toss-ups, but I'm going to go with West Virginia to win simply because I'm just going to play it safe with the home team. Next we have is UCLA taking on the Utah Utes. And for UCLA, they handled North Carolina Central. But for Utah, they did get a win. It was a small school win. It is what it is. And for this game, I don't know. It all depends on what Utah does at quarterback. And I think if they do good enough, I think they can get a win at home over UCLA. So give me the Utes. Next we have was a game that I actually intended on being the game of the week, but due to unforeseen circumstances with Colorado, I had to rescind in that pick. Anyway, the Colorado Buffaloes taking on the Oregon Ducks. Colorado, they had to rally against Colorado State in overtime to get the win. They did lose Travis Hunter in the game due to a lacerated liver. He will be out for like a month. Oregon, they're rolling. Another big win. I think they played Hawaii 55-10. And Oregon's one of the better teams in the Pac-12. And because of the injury, or even if Travis Hunter was healthy, I think Oregon will be too much for Colorado to handle. But I do think Colorado will give it a fight for at least 2 quarters before Oregon runs away with this. Next we have is Oklahoma State taking on Iowa State. And if I recall, Oklahoma State Cowboys lost to South Alabama. Yeah, that's pretty much all that needs to be said. And because of that, I'm taking Iowa State to win. No explanation needed. Next we have is the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets taking on the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Georgia Tech suffered a tough road loss against Ole Miss. As for Wake Forest, they had to rally, they had to come from behind to beat Old Dominion on the road. And it gives me some concerns about Wake Forest. And with this being their first game in the ACC, this is another one I went back and forth on. But I'm going to surprise everyone. And I'm going to take Georgia Tech on the road to get the win. Next we have is the Arkansas Razorbacks taking on the LSU Tigers. And this game is at night, so I don't even have to explain why I'm taking LSU to win. I think LSU at night is a different animal in college football. So give me the Tigers to win. Next we have is Arizona Wildcats taking on the Stanford Cardinals. Stanford lost to Sacramento State. They lost to Sacramento State. As for Arizona, I actually honestly don't know what they did last week. They might have won. They might have lost. Can't recall. But I am taking Arizona to win on the road. I do think they are the better team against Stanford. Next we have another interesting Pac-12 matchup with the Oregon State Beavers taking on the Washington State Cougars, Wazoo. And for this game, Washington State, they've been surprising a lot of teams this year. I told everyone, I knew the Pac-12 was going to be a different animal. As for Oregon State, they've been playing pretty good. And thanks to the revival of DJ Uiagalelei, this game is another one of those back and forth games. But since they're at home, I'm going to roll with Washington State to win. But this is going to be one of those games someone will have to lose. Next we have is the Texas Longhorns taking on the Baylor Bears. Texas overcame a very slow start against Wyoming but they ended up getting the win. As for Baylor, they did get their first win of the season last week. And with Texas being the more talented team, I do think they're going to win. But I will say this. I won't be surprised if this winds up a trap game for Texas. Just saying. Next we have is Minnesota taking on Northwestern. And both of these teams lost to schools that played in North Carolina, with Minnesota losing to the Tar Heels and Northwestern losing to Duke. And with me not believing in Northwestern in any facet this year, I'm thinking Minnesota to win on the road against Northwestern. Next we have is the Mississippi State Bulldogs taking on the South Carolina Gamecocks. Mississippi State, they got destroyed against LSU at home. Them Cowboy Bells went dead silent when LSU walked in. And as for the South Carolina Gamecocks, they got off to a hot start against Georgia. Too bad it didn't end that way. But I think South Carolina left out of that game better than what they felt like when they walked in. If they could hang with Georgia for at least a half, who knows? They could come in and spoil some teams in the SEC. And because of that, I'm going to roll with South Carolina to win against Mississippi State. Next we have is the Iowa Hawkeyes taking on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Penn State got their first conference win of the season over Illinois. And as for Iowa, they had a big win where they put up 40 points. Yes, an Iowa team put up 40 points. But they're going to need to put up a lot more points if they want to beat Penn State. And I just don't see that. So I'm going to roll with Penn State to win. Next we have is a conference opener for UCF taking on the Kansas State Wildcats. Kansas State, their most notable incident that happened was they lost on the road to Missouri on a 61-yard field goal. As for UCF, I can't recall what they did last week. They probably played a no-name school and won. I do expect a lot of points to be in this one, but I'm going to roll with Kansas State simply because, again, they're at home. Next we have is the North Carolina Tar Heels taking on the Pitt Panthers. Pitt lost their second straight game of the season, and they lost in the backyard brawl with West Virginia. As for North Carolina, they got a win over Minnesota, and it was mostly led by their defense and balanced offense. So far, from what I've seen from North Carolina, Drake May has not turned it loose yet. But I think this will probably be the game he could do it. I'm going to roll with Carolina to win on the road against Pitt. Because Pitt right now, they're pretty much in turmoil. And I know a lot of boosters, they're turning on their quarterback, Phil Dracovic. Next we have is the Cal Bears taking on the Washington Huskies. And having this little conversation about Heisman candidates, I'm hearing a lot of names like Shedeur Sanders and Caleb Williams. Right now, my Heisman pick is neither one of these dudes. It's Michael Penix. You see what this guy is doing. 400-yard passings in each of his first 3 games. And for this game, I do think he'll go less for that because Cal got a somewhat of a good defense. But I think Washington will do enough to win this game. I'm starting to become very, very high on the Washington Huskies. Then we have the return of USC Trojans taking on the Arizona State Wildcats. Because the Trojans, they had a bye week. Arizona State, if I recall, I think they might have lost last week. And for this game, yeah, I'm going to roll with USC to win. They're going to win by a freaking mile. And finally, the game of the week for this week, the Ohio State Buckeyes taking on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Now, Ohio State, I have not really watched Ohio State like that since week 1 when they barely beat Indiana, but they played 2 no-name schools, named Kyle McCord the permanent starter, and he looks more comfortable than ever. As for Notre Dame, their offense has been on a roll the start of the season and is led by 6-year quarterback Sam Hartman. This one is a true toss-up. And you know what's crazy? I'm going to roll with Notre Dame to win at home against the Ohio State Buckeyes. And that concludes my college football picks for this week. Tell me what y'all think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.